For nearly a year, Nariah Bloom fed a homeless man with food that did not belong to her. Every evening at 6:45 p.m., outside a cracked bus shelter on Dalton Avenue, she handed him meals prepared in a millionaire's kitchen. She was 28, black, a maid earning barely enough to keep her one-room apartment. He was fragile, weathered, white, speaking scripture like a man who had seen both heaven and hell. Then one cold Thursday morning, Nariah opened her door to find 3 police officers standing in the hallway, uniforms pressed, badges gleaming. A detective with gray temples and unreadable eyes standing at attention on her threadbare welcome mat. When Nariah pulled open the door, still in her cleaning uniform, her pulse hammering from the 5 a.m. wake-up call, her stomach dropped. "Miss Bloom," the detective said, his voice low and deliberate. "We need to talk about Eldon Rourke." "Eldon?" Her throat tightened. "The old man from the bus stop?" The detective's face remained stone. "Ma'am, we need to understand exactly what you've been doing for him." 11 months earlier, Nariah had noticed him for the first time. She walked the same route every evening after her shift ended at the Halverson estate. Down Callaway Heights, past the iron gates and manicured hedges that seemed to mock the broken sidewalks below. 3 blocks east toward her apartment building, where the paint peeled and the stairs groaned under every footstep. The bus shelter sat at the intersection of Dalton and Morse, wedged between a closed pawn shop and a convenience store with bars on the windows. That is where Eldon Rourke slept. On a flattened cardboard mat, a wool army blanket tucked around his shoulders, his possessions gathered in a faded duffel bag pressed against the shelter's scratched plexiglass wall. Most people crossed the street to avoid him. Some pretended not to see him at all. Nariah had done the same for 3 weeks, telling herself she had nothing to spare. She was barely surviving herself. Rent was late, utilities were overdue. The Halverson family paid her $11 an hour to cook gourmet meals she would never taste, to clean rooms she would never sleep in, to exist as wallpaper in a house that cost more than she would earn in 10 lifetimes. But one October evening, standing in the mansion's gleaming kitchen, after preparing herb-crusted lamb and roasted root vegetables for a dinner party she would not attend, Nariah stared at the leftovers destined for the garbage disposal. Her grandmother's voice echoed in her mind, "Waste is a sin when someone is hungry." She wrapped the lamb in foil, spooned vegetables into a container, added 2 dinner rolls, and slipped them into her canvas bag before anyone noticed. That night, her hands trembled as she approached the bus shelter. Before we continue, take a moment to support this story. Subscribe to this channel, like this video, and share it with someone who needs to hear about faith, kindness, and the power of obedience. Drop a comment and tell us, where in the world are you watching from? We love seeing how far these stories of hope travel. Eldon was awake when she arrived. His eyes were sharper than she expected for someone living on concrete. He watched her approach with caution, the way someone watches a stranger who might bring either mercy or cruelty. "Excuse me, sir," Nariah said, her voice barely above a whisper. "I have food. From my work. It's still warm." He stared at the container in her hands. For a long moment, he said nothing. "You need that more than I do," he finally said, his voice rough but steady. "That's debatable," Nariah replied softly. "But I'm offering." Eldon took the container with both hands, as if receiving communion. He bowed his head slightly. "God sees you, child," he whispered. Nariah almost walked away then, almost returned to her routine of not seeing, not stopping, not getting involved. But something in the way he prayed over the food, eyes closed, lips moving in silent thanksgiving, made her pause. "Do you drink coffee?" she asked. His eyebrows lifted. "Black is fine." The next evening she brought coffee in a thermos and an apple. The evening after that, soup and bread. By the end of the first week, It had become a ritual she could not imagine breaking. 6:45 p.m. every single night, Naraya walked 3 blocks out of her way to deliver food she had stolen, if she was being honest, from people who would never miss it. And every night, Eldon blessed her instead of thanking her. They came at 6:47 a.m., 3 sharp knocks that shattered the quiet of Thursday morning like a gavel striking wood. Naraya jolted awake on her mattress, heart already racing before her mind caught up to consciousness. She had worked until 1 a.m. the night before, scrubbing grout in the Halverson bathrooms until her knees ached and her hands cracked. She had collapsed into bed without eating, too exhausted even to pray. Now someone was pounding on her door. Naraya stumbled upright, pulled on the same cleaning uniform she had worn yesterday, and shuffled toward the door. Through the peephole, she saw 3 figures in the dim hallway light. Police officers. Her stomach dropped. She cracked the door open, leaving the chain lock engaged. Yes? The lead officer was tall, black, with gray at his temples and a face that gave away nothing. His badge caught the fluorescent light. Miss Naraya Bloom? Yes. Her voice came out smaller than she intended. I'm Detective Marcus Hayes. These are Officers Chen and Rodriguez. We need to ask you some questions. May we come in? Naraya's pulse hammered in her ears. Questions about what? About a man named Eldon Rourke. The name hit her like cold water. Eldon? Is he okay? Did something happen to him? Detective Hayes exchanged glances with the other officers. Miss Bloom, we need to come inside. She unhooked the chain with trembling fingers and stepped back. The 3 officers filled her tiny studio apartment, making the already small space feel suffocating. Officer Chen's eyes swept the room, taking inventory of her life. The mattress on the floor, the hot plate on the counter, the stack of unpaid bills held down by a coffee mug. Please sit down, Detective Hayes said, though it was not really a request. Naraya sank onto the edge of her mattress. Is Eldon hurt? I haven't seen him in 2 days. I went to the shelter yesterday and he wasn't there. How long have you known Eldon Rourke? Hayes pulled out a small notebook. About 11 months. I see him. I used to see him at the bus stop on Dalton Avenue. And you've been bringing him food? Naraya's mouth went dry. Yes, sometimes, when there's extra at work. How often is sometimes? I don't know. Every few days. The lie felt heavy on her tongue. Officer Rodriguez spoke for the first time. Miss Bloom, we have security footage from a camera outside the convenience store on Moore Street. You've been at that bus shelter every single evening for the past 11 months. 6:45 p.m., like clockwork. The blood drained from Naraya's face. I didn't know anyone was watching. We also have witness statements, Chen added. The store clerk, a few regular customers. They all confirm you've been bringing food and drinks to Mr. Rourke on a daily basis. Naraya's hands started shaking. I didn't steal it. I mean, it was leftovers. Food that was going to be thrown away. My employers don't mind. They've never said anything. Your employers, Hayes said slowly, are the Halverson family of Callaway Heights? Yes. I work there as a maid. Something passed between the 3 officers. Something Naraya could not read. Miss Bloom, Hayes leaned forward slightly. Do you know who Eldon Rourke is? He's just an old man who doesn't have anywhere to go. He's a missing federal witness. The words hung in the air like smoke. Naraya blinked. What? Eldon Rourke disappeared 7 years ago. He was supposed to testify in a federal corruption case involving misappropriated funds, money laundering, and real estate fraud. He refused witness protection. He refused hush money. And then he vanished. Naraya shook her head slowly. That doesn't make sense. He's homeless. He sleeps on cardboard. He was hiding, Rodriguez said flatly. And you've been helping him. No. Nariah stood up, her voice rising. I didn't know any of this. I was just bringing him food because he was hungry, that's all. I didn't even know his last name until you said it. Hayes stood as well, his expression softening slightly. We believe you, Miss Bloom, but we need to understand the full scope of your relationship with him. Did he ever talk about his past? Did he mention any names, places? He talked about Scripture, Nariah said desperately. He prayed. He blessed me. That's all. Did he ever give you anything? Papers? A phone number? An address? Nariah's mind raced backward through 11 months of conversations, and then she remembered. 3 weeks ago. Eldon had been different that night, more urgent, more focused. He had pressed something into her hands, a small brown paper bag, folded carefully. Keep this safe, he had said. If anything happens to me, if I'm not here one day, I need you to hold on to this. She had not looked inside. She had tucked it into the back of her closet and forgotten about it. Miss Bloom? Hayes was watching her face carefully. Did he give you something? Nariah turned toward her closet, her legs feeling like water. She pulled open the sliding door, reached behind her winter coat she could not afford to replace, and retrieved the brown paper bag. It weighed almost nothing. She handed it to Detective Hayes with trembling hands. He opened it carefully. Inside was a worn Bible, leather cover cracked and faded. Hayes flipped through the pages slowly and then stopped. His expression changed. Between the pages of Psalms were sheets of paper, handwritten notes in tight, careful script, names, dates, account numbers, addresses, and tucked into the back cover, a single note written on different paper in shakier handwriting. If you're reading this, God sent you. Hayes looked up at Nariah, then at the other officers. He spoke quietly, almost to himself. This changes everything. Officer Chen was already on her radio, speaking in clipped, urgent tones. Rodriguez moved toward the door, positioning himself as if expecting someone to try to enter. Nariah sank back onto her mattress, her entire body shaking. I don't understand. What is all this? Hayes sat down on her only chair, holding the Bible carefully. Miss Bloom, this is a confession. Names of people involved in a corruption ring that goes back 2 decades. Financial records, witness testimony, everything needed to reopen the case. He paused. And evidence linking some of these transactions to property in Callaway Heights. The words hit her slowly. The Halverson estate. Hayes nodded. The land that mansion sits on was purchased through a shell corporation named in these documents. Nariah pressed her hands against her face. Her breath came in short, sharp gasps. For 11 months, she had been walking between 2 worlds, serving the people who lived on stolen ground and feeding the man who held the truth buried in Scripture. Where is Eldon? She asked through her tears. Please, is he alive? Detective Hayes' silence was answer enough. Nariah collapsed forward, her shoulders shaking, her sobs breaking the stillness of the tiny apartment. Eldon Rourke, the man who had blessed her every night, who had called her child, who had looked at her like she mattered, was gone. And all she had left was his Bible and a truth that would shatter worlds. By Friday afternoon, Nariah's tiny apartment had become a crime scene without the tape. FBI agents in dark suits replaced the local police. They set up equipment on her counter, turned her closet inside out, photographed every corner of her life. Special Agent Victoria Moss, a sharp-eyed woman with silver hair pulled back in a tight bun, sat across from Nariah at the small table that doubled as her desk, dining surface, and prayer space. Miss Bloom, Agent Moss said, her voice professional but not unkind. We've verified the documents in Eldon Rourke's Bible. The handwriting matches samples we have from 7 years ago. The account numbers are real. The names, she paused, Some of these names are people we've been watching for years. Naraya stared at her hands. She had not slept, had not eaten. The world felt like it was tilting sideways. We need to understand the timeline, Moss continued. When did Mr. Rourke first mention his past? He didn't. Naraya's voice was hoarse. He talked about scripture, about justice, about how God remembers what people try to bury. I thought he was just... She stopped, shame flooding through her. I thought he was confused, old, maybe mentally ill. Agent Moss made notes. Did he ever seem afraid? Did anyone else approach him while you were there? Naraya shook her head. No, it was always just us, for 10, maybe 15 minutes. Then I'd leave to catch my bus home. And you never looked inside the bag he gave you? No. Naraya met the agent's eyes. He asked me to keep it safe, so I did. Another agent, younger, with a badge that read, Foster, approached the table. Agent Moss, you need to see this. They moved to the laptop set up on Naraya's counter. Naraya could see the screen from where she sat. A map with red dots, property records, financial statements. Foster pointed to something, spoke quietly. Moss's expression hardened. When she returned to the table, her entire demeanor had shifted. Miss Bloom, the Halverson estate, the property where you work, was purchased in 2003 through a shell corporation called Highlands Development LLC. According to Mr. Rourke's notes, that company was created specifically to launder money from a pension fund fraud scheme. $11 million were stolen from municipal workers' retirement accounts. The money was filtered through real estate purchases. Naraya felt the room spin. The Halversons know this. We don't believe so. The property changed hands 3 times before they purchased it in 2019. But the land, the foundation of their wealth, was built on stolen money. So everything I've been cleaning, Naraya said slowly, every meal I've cooked in that kitchen, was made possible by theft. Moss leaned back. And the man you've been feeding carried the only complete record of how it all happened. The irony was too cruel to comprehend. The invisible maid serving the beneficiaries of corruption. The homeless prophet holding the evidence that could topple an empire. And between them, a simple act of obedience, feeding the hungry that preserved the truth. Where is Eldon? Naraya asked again, though she already knew the answer in her bones. Agent Moss's face softened. We found him Tuesday morning, in a shelter across town, St. Vincent's. He checked himself in Sunday night complaining of chest pains. He died in his sleep early Tuesday. Natural causes, the coroner says. Heart failure. Naraya closed her eyes. Tears slid down her cheeks, silently. He knew. He knew. He was dying when he gave me that bag. We believe so, yes. Did he die alone? A volunteer was with him, a woman named Sister Margaret. She said he was peaceful. He prayed until the end. Naraya pressed her hands to her face, her body shaking with sobs she could no longer contain. For 11 months she had fed a man who was carrying the weight of truth so heavy it had cost him everything. His home, his identity, his safety, his life. And she had thought she was just being kind. God sees you, child. That was what Eldon said every night. God sees you. She had thought he meant God saw her sacrifice, her small act of kindness. But now she understood. God had seen her obedience, had placed her precisely where she needed to be, invisible to the powerful, visible to the powerless, so that when Eldon needed someone trustworthy, someone faithful, someone who would not ask questions or demand explanations, she would be there. Miss Bloom. Agent Moss waited until Naraya looked up. You're not in any trouble. I need you to understand that clearly. You've done nothing wrong. I stole food, Naraya said weakly. You saved evidence. Moss corrected. Evidence that will reopen a federal case. Evidence that will restore stolen pensions to people who lost everything. Evidence that will bring accountability to individuals who thought they were untouchable. She paused. You didn't know what you were protecting, but you protected it anyway. Nariah thought back to Eldon's words, the ones that had seemed like rambling. Truth has a longer memory than power. God remembers what men bury. You're a sent one. I didn't know who he was, Nariah whispered. I just knew God said feed him. The room fell silent. Even the agents working at the laptop stopped typing. Agent Moss sat perfectly still, studying Nariah's face. Say that again, Moss said quietly. I just knew God said, feed him. Nariah's voice grew stronger. I didn't understand why. I was hungry myself half the time. I was stealing food I didn't have permission to take. I was risking my job. But every time I thought about stopping, I felt like I was supposed to keep going, like it mattered more than I could see. Agent Foster spoke from across the room. That's faith. That's evidence preservation, Agent Moss said, but her voice carried something close to wonder. Whether you call it faith or instinct or obedience, Miss Bloom, you became the guardian of truth without even knowing it. Nariah looked at the worn Bible still sitting on her table, wrapped now in an evidence bag. Before you take it, can I read something from it? Moss nodded. Nariah opened it carefully, turning to the page she had memorized from her grandmother's teachings, Psalm 41:1. The page was marked with Eldon's handwriting in the margin. Blessed is the one who considers the poor. The Lord delivers him in the day of trouble. Beneath it, in shakier script, Eldon had written, She considered me. Now the Lord delivers through her. Nariah's hands trembled. Eldon had known. Even before he died, he had known that her simple obedience would become his testimony, that her faithfulness would give his truth a voice. On Monday morning, the news broke like thunder. Federal indictments in a 20-year-old corruption case, names of prominent businessmen, developers, and one former city councilman, warrants issued, assets frozen, and at the center of it all, the testimony of a homeless man named Eldon Rourke, preserved by a maid named Nariah Bloom. By Monday afternoon, reporters were outside Nariah's building. By Monday evening, her name was no longer invisible. The cameras arrived before sunrise on Tuesday. News vans lined the street outside Nariah's building. Their satellites extended toward the sky like mechanical prayers. Reporters cluttered the sidewalk, holding microphones and checking their makeup in compact mirrors. Someone had leaked her address, her name, her photograph. By 7 a.m., the street looked like a carnival of curiosity. Nariah stood at her fourth-floor window, staring down at the chaos, feeling more exposed than she had ever felt in her life. Her phone, the one she could barely afford to keep active, had been ringing non-stop since Monday evening. Unknown numbers, news producers, a lawyer offering representation, someone claiming to be from a publishing house. She had turned it off at midnight and had not turned it back on. Detective Hayes arrived at 8 a.m., pushing through the crowd with 2 uniformed officers clearing a path. He knocked on her door with the same firm rhythm he had used 4 days earlier, when her world had been smaller, quieter, and made sense. Miss Bloom. He looked tired. I'm here to escort you to a press conference. The district attorney wants to make a statement. They'd like you there. I don't want to be on television, Nariah said. I understand. But they need to clear your name publicly. Right now, there are conspiracy theories online suggesting you were part of a criminal network. Some people think you helped Eldon hide for money. Others think you're a federal informant. He paused. The truth needs a face, and that face is yours. Nariah looked past him at the circus below. I just fed a hungry man. I know, Hayes said gently, and now the world needs to know that too. The press conference was held at the Federal Building downtown, in a room with too many lights and too many people. Naraya sat in a chair beside the podium, wearing the only dress she owned, a simple navy blue she had worn to her grandmother's funeral 3 years earlier, her hands folded in her lap, her face blank with exhaustion. District Attorney Rachel Kimura stood at the podium, flanked by FBI agents and city officials. The room smelled like coffee and ambition. Thanks to the courageous testimony preserved by Eldon Rourke, Kimura began, her voice steady and rehearsed, and safeguarded unknowingly by Miss Naraya Bloom, we have successfully reopened a federal investigation into pension fraud, money laundering, and real estate corruption spanning 2 decades. Cameras flashed like lightning. Miss Bloom is not a suspect. She is not a conspirator. She is a citizen who showed extraordinary compassion to a man in need. Her daily acts of kindness became the vessel through which justice was preserved. More flashes, murmurs rippling through the press pool. Eldon Rourke gave his life to protect the truth. Miss Bloom protected that truth without even knowing what she carried. Today, we honor both of them. Kimura turned toward Naraya. Miss Bloom, would you like to say anything? Every eye in the room fixed on her. Naraya stood, slowly, her legs unsteady. She had not prepared anything, had not expected to speak. But as she looked out at the sea of faces, reporters hungry for a soundbite, officials hungry for credit, she felt something rise in her chest. Not anger, not pride. Something else. Something like clarity. I didn't know who Eldon was, Naraya said, her voice quiet but firm. I just knew God said feed him. The room fell silent. I didn't do this for recognition. I didn't do it for money. I did it because someone was hungry and I had food. That's all. She paused, feeling tears press against the back of her eyes. Eldon told me every night that God sees. I thought he was talking about me, but now I understand. God saw him, saw his sacrifice, saw his truth, and God used the smallest, most invisible thing, a maid with leftovers, to make sure that truth survived. She looked directly at the cameras. I don't want fame. I don't want interviews. I already got my reward. I got to know a man who taught me that obedience matters more than understanding, that kindness is never wasted, that the poor carry heaven's secrets. Her voice broke slightly. And I got to be part of something bigger than myself, without even knowing it. Naraya sat back down, her hands trembling. The room erupted in questions, but District Attorney Kimura raised her hand for silence. That's all for today. Thank you. By Wednesday, the indictments were finalized. 6 arrests, 14 subpoenas. Assets worth over $30 million frozen pending investigation. The Halverson estate was placed under federal review. Though the family themselves were not charged, they had purchased the property legally, unaware of its corrupt origins. Mrs. Halverson called Naraya Wednesday afternoon. We've decided to sell the estate, she said, her voice tight with embarrassment. We can't live there knowing what it was built on. We're donating the proceeds to the pension fund victims. She paused. Naraya, I owe you an apology. You worked in our home for 2 years, and I never saw you. Not really. I know, Naraya said simply. I'd like to offer you a settlement for the food you took, for the position this has put you in. I don't want your money, Mrs. Halverson. Then what do you want? Naraya thought for a moment. I want you to see the people you don't usually see. That's all. The line went quiet. Then, I'll try. On Thursday evening, exactly 1 week after the police had knocked on her door, Naraya walked 3 blocks east to the intersection of Dalton and Morse. The bus shelter looked the same. The plexiglass still scratched, the bench still cold. But the cardboard was gone. The duffel bag was gone. Eldon was gone. She carried a paper bag in her hands. Inside, a turkey sandwich, an apple, a thermos of coffee, and Eldon's Bible, returned to her that morning by Agent Moss, who had whispered, "He'd want you to have it." Neriah set the bag down on the bench, opened the Bible to Psalm 41, read the verse aloud into the empty evening air. "Blessed is the one who considers the poor. The Lord delivers him in the day of trouble." She traced Eldon's handwriting in the margin. Then she closed the Bible, placed it back in the bag, and left it there. Not for Eldon, for whoever came next, for the next invisible person who needed to know they were seen. Neriah stood, looked up at the darkening sky, and whispered, "Assignment complete." As she turned to leave, she noticed a figure approaching from the opposite direction. A young woman, maybe 19, with a backpack and hollow eyes. She looked at the bag on the bench, then at Neriah. "Is that—" the girl started. "It's for you," Neriah said gently. "If you need it." The girl's eyes filled with tears. "I haven't eaten since yesterday." Neriah smiled. The same smile Eldon had given her 11 months ago. "Then it's right on time." She walked away, leaving the girl with the food and the Bible. And as she walked, Neriah felt something she had not felt in years. Peace. Not because the case was closed, not because her name was cleared, but because she finally understood the truth Eldon had been trying to teach her all along. Obedience does not need applause. Kindness does not need credit. And mercy, true mercy, outlives every power that tries to silence it. 3 months later, Neriah started a ministry. Every evening, she prepared meals in a community kitchen and delivered them to the forgotten corners of the city. She trained others to do the same. And on the first night, she handed each volunteer a card with one instruction: feed them like you're feeding Jesus, because you are. The cycle continued. The obedience multiplied. And somewhere in the space between heaven and earth, Eldon Rourke smiled. Because the poor had spoken and the world had finally listened,